Tonight, FBI raids expose Minnesota politicians secretly coordinating with the Sinaloa cartel.
3:47 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota, February. Cold hung over the city like a burial shroud. The Mississippi River moved black and silent beneath the Stone Arch Bridge. Downtown towers stood dark except for the amber pulse of security lights in empty lobby. The streets were dead. The only sound was wind cutting through the warehouse district near the riverfront. Then came the helicopters. 3 FBI Blackhawks descended from the northwest, running without exterior lights. Their rotors shattered the silence like thunder rolling across frozen ground. Simultaneously, 18 unmarked federal vehicles converged on 6 locations across the Twin Cities metropolitan area. FBI, DEA, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, U.S. Marshals, a joint task force that had been assembled in secret over 9 weeks, operating under the code name Northern Vale. The first breach happened at a converted grain elevator in northeast Minneapolis. The building had been purchased 3 years ago through a shell company registered in Delaware. On paper, it was an artisan furniture warehouse. In reality, it was a Sinaloa cartel distribution hub that moved 40 kilos of fentanyl per week into Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. SWAT officers detonated the steel loading door with a breaching charge. Flashbangs arced through the interior darkness. Agents in tactical black poured through the smoke, rifle-mounted lights cutting white beams through the chaos. Inside, they found 12 cartel workers scrambling toward a rear exit. Duffel bags split open during the panic, spilling vacuum-sealed bricks of powder across concrete floors. One suspect tried to reach a hidden floor panel that led to a basement tunnel. He made it 4 steps before federal agents brought him down. The seizure from that single location, 127 kilograms of fentanyl, 2.1 million fentanyl pills pressed to look like prescription oxycodone, 43 firearms including 3 automatic weapons, and $4.2 million in cash bundled into moving boxes labeled reclaimed lumber. But that was not what made the agents stop breathing. In a locked office on the 2nd floor, investigators found a commercial-grade server rack, encrypted, connected to a satellite uplink, and running a secure messaging application that had been configured to auto-delete every message after 60 seconds. The server was still warm. Whoever had been monitoring this operation had disconnected moments before the raid. And the IP routing showed that the last connection had originated from a Minnesota state government building. Across the river in St. Paul, the second breach was already underway, a Victorian mansion in the Summit Hill neighborhood, one of the most prestigious addresses in the state. The home belonged to a prominent immigration attorney named Javier Calderon Reyes, a man who had appeared on cable news dozens of times defending sanctuary policies and criticizing ICE enforcement. What federal agents found inside his home told a different story. Calderon Reyes was not just an advocate, he was a facilitator. His law firm processed asylum paperwork for cartel-affiliated migrants who were then routed to safe houses across the Midwest. Each case file contained coded annotations that matched logistics schedules recovered from cartel communications. The attorney had been running a human trafficking pipeline disguised as humanitarian legal aid. In his basement, agents discovered a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside, communication equipment, prepaid phones, and a laptop containing signal chat archives that had not yet been purged. The chat group was named Northern Coordinator. The participants included 16 Minnesota politicians, 3 police commanders, 2 state judges, and 1 account identified only by an encrypted handle, North Star-1. The messages were surgical, dates and times of planned ICE enforcement actions, locations of federal staging areas, names of informants within immigrant communities who had cooperated with federal authorities, and warnings sent hours before raids, allowing cartel-connected individuals to relocate. One message from North Star 1, sent 11 weeks earlier, read, "Duluth corridor clear until Thursday. Move the Fargo shipment tonight. No federal presence confirmed." 48 hours after that message was sent, a semi-truck carrying 14 tons of methamphetamine crossed into Minnesota through a secondary highway checkpoint that had been inexplicably unstaffed. 6:15 a.m., FBI Cyber Forensics Division, Chicago Field Office. The encrypted server from Minneapolis arrived under armed escort. Within hours, a team of 12 federal analysts began the process of cracking its architecture. What they found was not a communication system. It was a command structure. The server hosted a secure network connecting 37 nodes across Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. Each node represented a cartel logistics point. Distribution warehouses, transit safe houses, money laundering fronts, and human trafficking relay stations. The network was organized with military precision, using compartmentalized access so that each operator only knew their immediate contacts. But the administrator logs revealed something else. Every major decision in the network required authorization from a single account. The account was registered under a rotating series of encrypted keys, but federal analysts traced the authentication pattern back through metadata timestamps and IP geolocation data. The authorization signals originated from the Minnesota governor's residence in St. Paul, specifically from a private study on the second floor that was swept for listening devices weekly by state security personnel. Governor Raymond Hessler, 61 years old, three-term state legislator before his gubernatorial election, champion of progressive immigration reform, vocal critic of federal enforcement operations, and, according to federal evidence, the primary political architect of a cartel protection network that had operated undetected for nearly 4 years. His digital signature appeared on logistics approvals for 17 major drug shipments. His calendar showed meetings with Calderon Reyes that were never publicly disclosed. His personal phone records included calls to numbers registered to Sinaloa cartel intermediaries operating out of Tijuana. This was not corruption, when this was command-level collusion between an American governor and a Mexican drug cartel. And the network map showed that Minnesota was just the beginning. The operation expanded within 72 hours. Dawn broke over a federal command center established at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Joint Reserve Base. Military personnel moved between stations as a massive digital display showed the updated target map. 47 red markers pulsed across 4 states. Distribution points, money laundering operations, human trafficking safe houses, tunnel system, and political targets. Deputy Director Henley addressed the assembled agents at 5 a.m. sharp. What you are about to execute is the largest coordinated anti-cartel operation ever conducted in the American Midwest. You will hit every target simultaneously. You will seize every asset. You will arrest every individual on your lists regardless of their position, title, or political affiliation. Today, we remind the cartels and their collaborators that no office in this country grants immunity from justice. The operation launched at 5:30 a.m. in Rochester, Minnesota. FBI and DEA agents raided a medical supply company that had been shipping fentanyl precursors disguised as pharmaceutical ingredients. The facility yielded enough raw materials to produce 50 million lethal doses. In Duluth, ICE agents hit a fishing charter company that operated as a human trafficking firm. Migrants were smuggled across Lake Superior from Canadian transit points, then routed to agricultural labor camps where they worked under debt bondage. 23 trafficking victims were recovered. 11 cartel enforcers were arrested. In Fargo, North Dakota, a joint team breached a storage facility that contained the regional cash reserves for the cartel's Midwest operations. The seizure, $67 million in U.S. currency. The money had been laundered through a network of car washes, laundromats, and cryptocurrency exchanges operating under the protection of compromised local officials. In Des Moines, Iowa, federal agents arrested a state legislator who had received $340,000 in cartel payments routed through a fake agricultural consulting firm. The legislator had sponsored bills that reduced penalties for drug traffic and limited cooperation between state and federal law enforcement. In Madison, Wisconsin, a federal judge was taken into custody after evidence showed he had dismissed 14 cases involving cartel-affiliated defendants over 3 years. His offshore accounts contained $2.1 million in unexplained deposits. Every raid produced more evidence. Every server contained more names. Every arrest led to more connections. By noon, federal authorities had seized 31 tons of narcotic, including fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine, $142 million in cash and assets, 847 firearms, 14 properties used for human trafficking, and they had arrested 203 individuals, including 19 elected officials, 27 law enforcement officers, and 4 judges. The cartel's Midwest empire did not just take damage, it collapsed, but the deepest wounds came within. As investigators processed the seized data, a darker pattern emerged. 31 Minnesota law enforcement officers had been receiving regular payments from cartel intermediaries, not just patrol officers. And sergeants, lieutenants, a deputy police chief in a Minneapolis suburb, a commander in the state highway patrol. The payments were small at first, a few $100s for information about patrol schedule, then larger amounts for advance warning of federal operations. Eventually, direct participation in logistics coordination. One officer had personally escorted 3 cartel shipments through highway checkpoints over 18 months. His explanation in recovered messages: "My kids need college? The feds don't pay for that." Another officer had provided the home addresses of 3 ICE informants to cartel contacts. 2 of those informants had subsequently disappeared. Their bodies were found months later in rural Wisconsin, executed with cartel signature method. The corruption was not opportunistic, it was systematic. Cartel recruiters had identified vulnerable officers through financial monitoring. They approached them with sympathy and small offers. They created dependency through escalating payments, and they ensured loyalty through documented evidence of participation that could destroy careers and families. One honest sergeant in the St. Paul Police Department broke down during his federal interview. "I knew something was wrong. I reported my suspicions to my commander three times, and nothing happened. Now I know why. My commander was one of them." The commander was arrested at 6:47 a.m. during the coordinated raids. He had received $89,000 in cartel payments over 2 years. He had altered patrol assignments to create gaps in coverage during shipment windows. And he had personally approved the transfer of 2 officers who had asked too many questions about suspicious department activities. The federal investigation concluded that the cartel had effectively created a parallel enforcement structure within Minnesota law enforcement, a shadow system that protected cartel operations while wearing American badges. Governor Hessler was arrested at 7:15 a.m. at his private residence. He emerged in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents, as news cameras captured the moment that would define his legacy. He said nothing. His expression showed no surprise, only the cold recognition of a man who had always known this day might come. The federal indictment against him ran 847 pages. It documented 4 years of systematic coordination with Sinaloa cartel leadership. It showed how his office had interfered with federal enforcement operations through policy directives designed to appear as principled opposition. It revealed how his administration had approved state contracts with companies that served as cartel fronts. And it exposed how his political network had recruited and protected collaborators at every level of Minnesota government. The evidence showed that Hessler had not just accepted cartel support. He had restructured Minnesota's political apparatus to serve cartel interests. He had transformed a prosperous Midwestern state into a logistics hub for drug trafficking, human smuggling, and money laundering. And he had done it while publicly presenting himself as a defender of immigrant rights and progressive values. His sanctuary policies were never about protecting vulnerable migrants. They were about protecting cartel operations from federal interference. Every speech about compassion was calculated. Every criticism of ICE was strategic. Every policy that limited enforcement cooperation was designed to create gaps that the cartel could exploit. The investigation also revealed the continental scope of the network. Minnesota was not an isolated case. It was a model. Federal analysts mapped the cartel's political infiltration strategy across the northern United States. Similar patterns emerged in Oregon, Washington, Illinois, and New York. Politicians who rose on sanctuary platforms while maintaining hidden connections to cartel logistics. Law enforcement officers who received payments for information and protection. Judges who dismissed cases and sealed records. The Sinaloa cartel had recognized something that American intelligence had underestimated. Political power could be purchased. And in a democracy, purchased politicians could reshape the legal landscape to protect criminal operations more effectively than any army of enforcers. The network had been moving an estimated 40 tons of narcotics per month through northern corridors. Shipping manifests were altered at port facilities. Way stations were closed for maintenance during scheduled convoy movements. Border checkpoints were understaffed during peak trafficking windows. Human trafficking operations moved thousands of migrants through the network annually. Some were economic refugees seeking work. Others were trafficking victims sold into forced labor or sexual exploitation. All of them were processed through legal aid organizations that served as cartel fronts. Their cases handled by compromised attorneys who ensured they remained dependent on cartel-controlled systems. The scale was staggering. The ambition was terrifying. Federal investigators found evidence that the cartel's long-term strategy included establishing permanent political control over key northern states, not through violence or intimidation, through campaign contributions, legal manipulation, and the patient cultivation of politicians who would protect cartel interests for decades. They were not just infiltrating American democracy, they were redesigning it. The human cost of this network cannot be measured in tons of drugs or millions of dollars. In Minnesota alone, fentanyl overdose deaths increased 340% during the years that Governor Hessler's protection network operated. Families destroyed, communities shattered, young people who made one mistake and never got a second chance because the poison that killed them flowed through channels that a governor had helped protect. Across the Midwest, the numbers are worse. Thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of addictions, hundreds of thousands of lives touched by the violence, grief, and destruction that accompanies cartel operations. And for every ton of drugs that moved through this network, human trafficking victims suffered in silence. Migrants who came to America seeking hope found themselves trapped in systems of exploitation protected by the same politicians who claimed to champion their rights. The cruelty was not incidental, but it was designed. The cartel understood that human suffering created dependency, that addiction created markets, that desperation created exploitable populations. And they found American politicians willing to facilitate that suffering in exchange for power and money. So what happens now? The federal investigation continues. More arrests are expected in the coming weeks. The political networks that protected cartel operations are being dismantled systematically. But this story is not really about one governor or one state. It is about how power works when no one is watching, how corruption spreads when good people stay silent, how democracy can be hollowed out from the inside by those who swear oaths to protect it. Governor Raymond Hessler took an oath to serve the people of Minnesota. Instead, he served the Sinaloa cartel. He used the language of compassion to mask collaboration with murderers. He weaponized progressive values to shield drug traffickers and human smugglers, and he almost got away with it. The only reason this story exists is because federal investigators refused to accept the political barriers that protected him. They followed the evidence, they built the case, and they executed an operation that reminded everyone watching that no office in America places you above the law. But here is the question you should be asking yourself right now. How many other states have networks like this operating in the shadows? How many other politicians built their careers on principles they never believed while secretly serving interests that would horrify their voters? How many communities are suffering right now because someone in power decided that cartel money was worth more than American lives? This story is a warning. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives with speeches about justice and compassion. Sometimes it wears the mask of moral authority while quietly opening doors for the worst criminals on earth. The cartels learned something important about America. Our democracy runs on trust. And when that trust is betrayed by those we elect to lead us, the consequences are measured in body counts and broken families. If you watch this entire story, you understand why it matters. Tap like so more people see what federal investigators uncovered. Comment expose if you believe this kind of corruption should be dragged into the light wherever it exists. And share this with someone who needs to understand how deep cartel infiltration has reached into American politics. And remember, this story is fictional, created to illustrate real dangers through dramatic storytelling. But the patterns it describes are documented. The tactics are real. And the threat to American democracy from cartel political infiltration is not fiction. It is happening. The only question is whether we pay attention before it is too late. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. That phrase was never more relevant than it is today. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never assume that the people who claim to protect you are telling the truth about who they really serve.